Ed, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, guys. So yeah, first off, the Paquette. That's the one we all kind of started with. It's something brand new for us. And for those who don't know, Paquette is, if you're a French speaker, you might know that Paquette is a pejorative term for a wine. When you taste a wine, you go, it's not very good. You go, it's called a Paquette. It's not a good wine. And it's become sort of a weird vogue right now. Paquette is actually illegal in the EU. You're not allowed to make Paquette in the European Union. But here in North America and elsewhere, we're not bound by those same laws. So here's the deal. It's not wine. It is technically a wine beverage or a wine drink. And what we do is we harvest our grapes. In this case, it's Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc primarily. Also some Merlot in there, which is what's giving you the color. We crush them, we make our wine, but then we save those skins. We add a bunch of more just plain old water to it, a little bit of sugar, and we re-ferment it. And we get this super light, this is only 6% alcohol. There's no residual sugar left in this product at all. And it's basically sort of, you know, if you've had White Claw or any of those kind of hard seltzers, that's kind of what this is, the wine version of that, if you will. And it makes perfect sense for us at Foreign Affair, because at Foreign Affair, everything we make is affected by some level of something called a passamento or dried grape. So we're reusing the skins a third time, if you will, which is kind of cool. So you guys are almost my first test market for this thing. Do you like it?
Yeah, it's actually much lighter especially compared to the BB Paquette. Which I find is it's very strong tasting, very herbaceous, and it's a little bit more. It's got some hops in it that they add to theirs, right?
Yeah, they do.
This one's a little bit more wine focused, which I think is going to go over better this summer for sure.
It's interesting to see, because the thing about Paquette is there's no rules. Because it's in the Wild West in the wine or drinks world. People are doing all kinds of wacky things with it. They're fermenting it with honey and then grape skins and all kinds of stuff like that. And a lot of people put it out as a very cloudy, still full of dead yeast cells and high levels of bacteria in it, which is kind of honestly a more historic or traditional way of serving it. The problem with those ones is they don't last real long. At the end of 2 or 3 months, it goes from tasting pretty good to something you put on your chips or your French fries. It gets very vinegary at the end. We wanted one that was more stable, so this has been filtered properly, which is why it's nice and clean and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's nice and light, easy going.
Very good. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing something.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys. It was good fun. Like I say, I wanted to try something new and use you guys as guinea pigs, frankly. So I have a lineup of some of the wines you have available to you tonight. I'm not going to drink all of them because even though I am at home, this is not a digital background. This is my garage. I was saying earlier that this is during COVID, I did a whole series of things called Somm in the Shop, which was me standing in front of my table saw here and tasting wine and talking to people. So when this came up, it seemed the perfect spot to do it. And the big advantage to that is I can drink with you guys, and I don't have to drive home. I can just walk up the stairs and hang out with the kids. Many of you, I assume, have not been to the winery out at Foreign Affair. It's a little bit of a drive for you, and we're a little unusual. And I'll get back to that. But we've been at it now. This is 2000. We've been at it 18 years. So our very first vintage was 2004. Len and Marissa Crespino were the founders of the winery. And we're all here because they fell in love with Amarone. Back in the early 90s, they were working for the Ontario government as trade representatives in Italy. A pretty sweet job if you can get it, working in Milan. And anyway, they fell in love with Amarone. They had never had it before. Well, they were there, of course. They're trying the local tasty stuff, and that's what they tried. And Amarone is unusual in the wine world. Most wine is this mad rush. As soon as that fruit, your grapes are ready to harvest, you pick them, you get them to the winery as fast as you can, crush them, start making wine. Fresh is really important everywhere in the world, except Amarone, except Veneto up near Venice in northeastern Italy. They pick those fresh fruit, that healthy stuff, they put it on straw mats and then let it dry or partially raisin for as much as a couple of months, actually. And then they crush it and start making the wine. This is why Amarone wines are higher in alcohol, a little darker, and have a very unique kind of character to them. And Len just loved it. And when he came back, and I think it was 93, they came back, and he just kept talking about it for a decade, saying, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And finally, Marissa had enough, and she went out and bought the vineyard without telling him, and came back one day and said, here, now you can shut up and actually do something. Here's the vineyard, start to do that. This is a technique that I have tried now. I've been married for 18 years, and I complain bitterly that I don't have a vineyard, but my wife has not yet bought me a vineyard for it. So I'll keep trying. I don't hold out much hope, though, I have to say. So they planted in 2001, forgive me. First vintage was 04, and here we are now. We now, like Stephanie was saying, we make a really wide portfolio. We now have 18, 19, depending on the season, different wines in our portfolio, but everything is affected by some level of this appassimento. Most of our wines are partial appassimentos. What that means is we harvest the grapes, we put them in the chamber to dry, we dry and make that very expensive, the appassimento stuff. But then the next day we go out and we pick the rest of the fruit and we ferment that the normal way. And then we blend the two together. So most of these wines you see, like the Malbec Merlot here, that thing is sitting at around 15% of this wine is made with those dried grapes, and the rest is made the normal way. And then, as I said, we blend them together. So to do this appassimento technique outside of Italy is a really unusual thing. In fact, when Len first started that 2004 vintage, in fact, the 2004, 5, and 6 vintages did not qualify to be called VQA wines because there was no category for it. It didn't fit. They didn't know what to do with it. And fortunately for us, Len had a long career in bureaucratic government. And so he knew how the wheels worked, and he just started fighting with them and didn't give up. And eventually they changed the rules, allowing this appassimento technique to take over, or to be its own category, I should say. I am right now drinking one of the red wines. I'm drinking the this guy right here, the Malbec Merlot. I don't know if anybody else has picked that one yet, but it's a personal favorite right now.
Yeah, we got a few hands up back here.
Oh, good. So it's pretty neat stuff. Now, I should also point out, we do things a little differently because of this appassimento, and we've also changed a lot over the 18 years of the winery's start. So there's this guy here. This is called Grand Q, and you guys, there's bottles of it there to look at, but I'll show you the label sort of. And this is what I'm getting at. We've changed some of our labeling. So in the old days, this was the back label. I had this Italian scene, and we had iconic Canadian animals in front of it there. So this is the one was for Grand Q. As we move forward, we've changed that quite a bit. And now sometimes we'll start seeing these black label ones, which are very sexy with a little gold animal on them. And what that means, because we're making such a broad number of wines now, the ones with the black label on them are wines that have got in really limited production. So the Malbec that's in this, we have 1/2 acre of it down at the winery site, actually. We won't necessarily get the wine every year. So in really short runs, we'll see maybe 100 cases of that kind of wine made. Whereas things like the Conspiracy, Dream, Temptress, those wines will make pretty much every single year as we go. Now, that's the very quick and dirty about Foreign Affair. Somebody asked me a question. Ask me anything you want. I'm a good liar.
Anybody have questions? About the wines you're drinking, techniques? We gotta catch up. We gotta get Alex is not pouring fast enough.
Uh-oh.
Have a glass one.
He was too busy listening to you. I got distracted.
No, we were like.
All right.
Okay, so how about, maybe just do a quick little introduction with the ones that you have behind there, and they'll give them a little summary of a few of them.
Okay. So this guy is the sparkling rosé. This is the very first time. So I've worked for the winery now, 7 years. And in my interview with Len, I remember asking him, I saying, so when are you going to make a sparkling wine? Because I see you've got some Chardonnay in the vineyard, you've got some Pinot Noir in the vineyard, all that kind of stuff that make good bubbly. And he said, no, we're not going to do that. It took 7 years. And here we are finally. This is our very first sparkling wine we've ever made. It's a rosé. It's very much like Prosecco. It's made in the same way as Prosecco is made. This is a blend mostly of Riesling, Then it's also got some Pinot Noir in there, which is what's giving it, and Gamay, which is what's giving it this lovely pink color. And that's a very Prosecco way of doing things, is blending a red grape with a white grape to get the pink color. The neat thing about Prosecco is the way it's made. This is made using something called the Charmat method. And making traditional sparkling wine is a really laborious and expensive way of making wine. So this guy is done in what's called a Charmat tank. If you're making traditional sparkling wine, what you do is you make a very boring, what's called a base wine. So it's a fairly high acid, not particularly tasty wine. You put that in your bottle, you add some yeast, you add some sugar, and you put a beer cap on top, and you leave it alone. And what happens is the yeast eats the sugar, makes a little bit of alcohol, and it gives a little bit more CO2 off. The CO2 has nowhere to go, so it dissolves in. That's how you get your bubbles. The problem is now you've got this dead layer of dead yeast cells on the bottom, and you got to get rid of them. So in champagne, what they do is they take that bottle very carefully and they put it in a board, and it sits on an angle like this, and they come along once a day and they give it a quick snap and they move it up just a little bit, and a quick snap and they move it up. And what's happening is they shake all those dead yeast cells down to the bottom until eventually it becomes sur point, upside down. All those yeast cells are sitting on this beer cap. You put that in a freezing brine, you freeze a plug about 1 inch thick, and then you turn it up, open it, shoots out the plug of dead yeast cells and all the rest of it. You top it up, you put the cork in, you're done. That's a lot of work. And that is generally about a 3-year start to finish process for doing that. Charmat method, which is what this is you get your base wine, you put it, instead of in the bottle, you put it in a giant pressure capable tank, add your yeast, add your sugar, it ferments in there, all the yeast cells stay in there, you filter and bottle it directly into the bottle, and voila, you get this. It's lovely stuff. It's not a pile of money. It's like retails $25, and it's going really well. We're loving it. Has anyone tried it yet today?
Yeah,
A couple? Yeah, it's good. I'm a big fan of it.
In here, so that was an easy sell.
There you go. It's cool though too. Having said all that, gone to that very abridged, I admit, but boring explanation as to how hard it is to make traditional method sparkling wine. We just made some, and so we're going to release it in July 23rd. We're going to have an event at the winery, and you can come see us online. We made a very small amount, only about 1,000 liters of it, and which is about 1,500 bottles. And we made a traditional sparkling wine as well, which is really cool. So we're now making 2 different sparkling wines for it. The other ones that are on the table, something that's worth looking at too, is this guy. This is what I'm drinking, actually. I had another bottle of it, but this is the Whiskey Barrel Cab Sauv. So Len and Marissa had the company, made the company. We're here because of them. But at some point, this was their 3rd career for each of them, starting this winery. So they needed to, or wanted to retire, and their daughter wasn't interested in the business. So they had to sell the business. And 4 years ago now, they sold us, and we were sold to Corby Canada. So the same guys who make Weiser's whiskey, and which was a little scary for those of us working there. You're always worried that they're going to change things completely or something, and they didn't. They've been very good. They allow us to continue making weird and wonderful things like Paquette and all the rest of it. At some point, they may ask us to make money, but so far they haven't. The really neat thing, though, the thing we did right off the bat was this project. So within 2 weeks of the sale happening, our winemaker at the time, Barclay Robinson, was on the phone to the master blender down in Windsor, and they arranged a barrel swap. So we sent down a bunch of our old used Cab Sauv barrels down to Pike Creek, and Pike Creek sent up a whole bunch of their used whiskey barrels for us. So this Cabernet Sauvignon spent the last 4 months of its life in these old whiskey barrels, picking up these whiskey notes and characteristics in it. And it was such a huge success. Like, we really liked the flavors we got from it, that we also did it with, you've got some of the whiskey barrel conspiracy there as well. So we've got kind of 2 tiers of this same idea. Now this guy is a big bruiser. It'd be kind of a fun experiment for you guys. You've got to do the tasting side by side, because this is a partial Appassimento wine. 30% of this Cab Sauv is made with Appassimento wine. The other one we have there is the Ripasso wine. So what that is, And please interrupt me if you guys want and ask a question if I'm getting too, this is like, it winds up being a little bit like going to Starbucks for the first time. All you want is a damn cup of coffee and you have to teach you Italian first. So the other wine we have is a Ripasso. This is a partial Appassimento. The other one's a Ripasso. Ripasso means we make a regular wine and then we repass it. We put it on, soak it in the skins of the leftovers from the Appassimento winemaking. So they're kind of tiered. The Conspiracy whiskey barrel is less expensive and it is a little lighter and a little drier kind of character to it. This has got more of that whiskey note and it's got a much bigger, bolder character to it. So has anyone tried it yet on your tasting panel? Are you going to? Yeah.
Yeah, we got a line up in front of them.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. What's really cool is when I've had the whiskey as well. So they make the Pike Creek makes the whiskey. And when you put the two products beside you and you try them, so you smell the wine. And to me, when I smell the wine, the first note that pops out is a bit of that whiskey kind of, that vanilla, almost a bourbony note to it. And then when I smell the whiskey, the first thing that pops out is the wine note on it, which is kind of fun. But unfortunately, I don't live in a civilized country, so I can't sell both products. I have to only sell the wine that we make.
Well, I actually mentioned, I believe, Albiron was trying to source out the Pike Creek barrel wine, and they said they couldn't get it yet. So
no, they couldn't get it yet. I found out after, I found out after your visit that they only picked up the barrels about this recent batch of barrels from us about 4 weeks ago. So it just hasn't had time to sit in the barrel long enough to do it. They haven't bottled yet. So they're hoping to have it done by Christmas, I think. So
it's okay. We'll just do another tasting at Christmas.
Yeah, there you go. Because we're keen because we just got our barrels for this batch too. We just I think the same truck took them back and forth. We just got our whiskey barrels. When was that? Yesterday, to do our next series as well. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's an enormous difference between whiskey barrels and wine barrels. For those of you who've been to the winery or seen any picture of a wine barrel, you know, they're pretty things. They're nice, made out of oak, of course, and all that. They're beautiful. You know, we send down these they're used, but we send down these very good looking, good condition barrels down to the guys at Pike Creek. They send us up the nastiest, ugliest looking barrels you've ever seen in your life. And the difference comes to this is that it's still oak, of course. We just toast ours. Wine people only really toast the inside of the barrel because we want it's a delicate product. You want more delicate flavors. Whiskey guys, they char the inside of the barrels. And so they really take more abuse that way. And then secondly, whiskey guys use those barrels forever. We'll only use the barrels 4 or 5 times before they become pretty neutral. So when you're reusing a barrel, it's a lot like trying to reuse a tea bag, you know. First time you use it, you get a lot of flavor out of it. Second time, it's a little less. By 4 or 5, it's pretty neutral. You're just getting some breathing, which is nice and all that, but you're not getting much flavor anymore. The whiskey barrel guys, I found a stamp on the last batch. It was 1978 was when that barrel was new. So they used them a long, long time. Still had some interesting aromas in it when you pop the bung out of it, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed. Maybe for one of our last ones, just so we don't keep too much time, can you go over like the Grand Q, like the Grand Q and the Pizza, just the two big ones? That's where you're going?
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going. So it's interesting. So this is Grand Q. This is the 2015 Grand Q, and it has what we're calling the old label, the original sort of label. This is L'Eredita. So in the past, Leonard Marissa, when it came to their very top tier wines, they made it, if it was Cabernet Franc, then it was a wine that was 100% Appassimento and 100% Cabernet Franc. And then they made another wine called Grand Q, and I'll explain that in a minute. And that was a blend of Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, and Merlot. And again, all 100% Appassimento. Now, the Cab Franc was $110. This guy's $150 a bottle. They're not cheap wines. We make very little of them, I must say. But they are fantastic stuff. It's really interesting to do. This is when you're making wine that's 100% from Appassimento fruit, you're not making a lot of wine. We take 1 ton of fruit, put it in the shed to dry. By the time we start making wine with that, our yield goes down by like between 40 and 50%. We lose just a dehydration, and there's always a little bit of rot that we have to get rid of as well. So it's very, very expensive stuff to make. And then it sits in barrel for nearly 2 years usually before we do it. So along comes Corby. Corby buys the company, and Len and Marissa retire. And as we move forward, we wanted to change up the labels because we thought this was starting to look a little old. So we also wanted to give it a new name. So L'Eredita, and I don't speak any Italian. I don't even speak English very well, but is heritage. So we're paying homage to Len and Marissa Crispino. Without them, we wouldn't be here. And this is what that new label is going to look like. I can't see if you'll see it very well on the camera, but anyway, it's pretty fancy. You've got a bottle of it there. Pretty fancy stuff. 100% Cab Sauv. This is the 2017 vintage. It's the 17 has got some great spicy tones to it. Reminds me a lot of like there's kitchen herbs sort of. And that one and this one both share the fact that they have got this massive kind of fig and date. So it moves from being those fresh blackberries or even black cherry kind of notes in the other wines, particularly the Malbec, to more of this dried fig and date and almost a Christmas cakey note that comes through of them in these wines. Now this guy is called Grand Q. Grand Q is so named for two reasons. One, it's a silly play on words. Grand Q sounds a lot like Grand Cru. So we're having some fun wine knowledge. That's a purely geeky thing. Secondly, though, and more importantly, Q stands for Quintarelli. There was a winemaker in Italy called Giuseppe Quintarelli, and he was in Amarone, and he was making Amarone wines. Now, if you're an Amarone winemaker, you've got some rules you have to follow. And one of them is the grape varieties you use. If you are going to call it Amarone, you have to use the traditional grape varieties, which is Corvina, Rondolina, Molinera. Those are the grapes you're allowed to use. Well, Giuseppe was a bit of a renegade. He was growing Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, and Merlot in Italy, in Amarone, and not calling it Amarone because he can't. He calls it Alizera instead. And if you ever see some at the LCBO, it's generally $650 to $700 a bottle when it comes in. We don't get much in Ontario. I think only about 2 6-packs when it shows up, but very expensive, highly sought after stuff. Len heard about this and thought, oh, that's great. He's making the same kind of wine I'm making. The first vintage of this, 2010, was in barrel at this time. And he flew to Italy and tried to meet with the guy, which was just, to my mind, really crazy. But sure enough, Len's checking into his hotel in the area because he didn't have a meeting or an appointment with him. Checking into the hotel, the guy's at the clerk's just making conversation, says, what are you in the region for? And he says, well, I'm trying to meet up with Giuseppe Quintarelli. And wouldn't the guy behind him say, oh, well, don't worry, he's my cousin. I'll give you his phone number. We'll give him a call. And so he actually got to meet him, which is really cool because at that time he was he was an older man. He was very frail. He went through the whole cellar, did an enormous tasting with him, which was, I'm just so envious. Anyway, came back and before Len got back, he had passed away actually. So he was one of the last visitors for him, which is kind of cool. So the back of this wine is named in homage to Giuseppe Quintarelli, the master of Amarone winemaking. Makes some just stunning wines. And so we're doing our very best. This is the very top of our pile. So as I say, it's mostly Cab Franc, then Cab Sauv, and then Merlot, the 3 principal grapes we give. And this is one of the things that makes us stand out as being so different, is we're using this it's ancient Italian wine making technique. We're applying it to French grape varieties that are growing here in Niagara. So you're going to get an absolutely unique experience from these wines every time. So it's neat stuff. 2015 vintage. It's just starting to calm down, I think. These are wines that need a fair bit of time to settle down. They never have that intense fruity note of some of the other New World wines do, like Australia or California. There's always more of this spicy, and as I said, kind of, to me, kind of a Christmas spices that go through it. Has anyone tried that one yet?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. A lot of nodding heads.
Yeah.
Before I let Ed go back to his garage, does anyone have any questions for him about the wines that you're having today? Oh, Norm does.
It's a little early, but I mean, as far as 2021, what's his take on?
Okay. So
Okay.
recent vintages, 2020 was kind of a crappy year for the world for due to COVID and all the rest of that junk. But I'm here to tell you, in Niagara, 2020 was a brilliant vintage for winemaking and wine growing. It was fantastic. It was really, really good. We're just putting some of those wines in bottle now. The 21s, the 21 vintage was what the French like to call a challenging year. In other words, it was a tough vintage. We had rain when we didn't want it, and we had sunshine when we didn't need it. So it was a tough year. So we won't be making L'Heredita in 21. We won't be making Grand Cru in 21. We'll only make those wines in years where we think we've got the best possible fruit going, and it was a tough year for that. So our yield was reduced in 21, and then to add insult to injury, the winter was pretty hard last year, and that caused a fair bit of vineyard damage. For instance, I can tell you right now, in 22, we won't be bottling any Merlot. Most of our Merlot didn't make it, which means we're in about a 4-year cycle to get more Merlot back into the vineyard. So this vintage at least has started out well. We'll see what happens. It's too early to tell for this year, but yeah, challenging year last year. So it'll be a good year. 21 is going to be a very good year for some of the white wines and the light wines and the sparkling wines. It'll be quite good. I don't think you'll see any big blockbuster reds though in 21. And that's not just from us, that's the region as well.
Oh, Norm, you have another question?
One last question, because I want other people to ask questions as well, but if someone is like, do we order to be delivered at home?
Yes, absolutely. Come see me online. And by that, I don't mean me. I mean someone who's competent and could actually do this. But come see the winery online, and we ship anywhere in Ontario, easy peasy. Yeah, not hard to do. And it doesn't have, you don't have to order a case of something too. If you want, I'll sell you one bottle, but and you can mix up a case. You can have 6, 8, 12 different things in there. All up to you.
Sorry, Lauren, you had a question?
What's the ideal laying down time for the whiskey barrel cap?
See, that's a tough question, because the vintage we're on now, that's only the second year we've done it.
Okay.
So, I just opened the 2017
Yeah, hang on.
and it's phenomenal.
There.
It's phenomenal.
Sorry, I unplugged myself from my microphone. Yeah, the problem is, like I say, it's we've only made it twice, so I don't have a long track. Like Temptress, I know easily 8, 9 years in the cellar was a lovely time for it. My guess, I have been at this a while, so I've got a pretty good feeling about the whiskey barrel. I think probably somewhere between 6 and 8 years in that neighborhood. I think for me personally, when I think it's going to show. I've got some bottles in my cellar, and we'll wait and see what happens with them. It's got such a high amount of the Appassimento in there that helps as a preservative agent, and then the whiskey component is the weird one. I don't know what that's going to do over time, frankly, but it's tasting good now. So drink some now. If you're curious, put some in the cellar and give it a couple more years. Yeah, I'd like to give you some sort of very educated and effete answer. Oh well, it's got 15 and a half years. Will be perfect. I don't know. And the other part of that problem is, of course, it's wildly personal. I personally, I've been in the business a long time. I kind of like mature wines. So I keep a small cellar, and I always have some wine that's kicking around that's 10, 12 years old. But I don't drink those wines every day. What I drink every day are the current release wines, and that your palate kind of gets used to that. So it's up to, you might find that bottle of wine and go, oh, that's a fantastic bottle. I'm going to save that for it's 10 years old. And you pull it out and try it at 10 years old, and it's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But you go, ooh, that doesn't taste anything like the wine I had yesterday. Is it supposed to be good? Is it supposed to taste like this? Without being in practice of that, it's kind of hard to judge that. You know what I mean? So if you're enjoying it, then that's the time to drink it.
Anyone else? Everyone's eating and drinking now.
There you go. Okay, that's excellent.
Before I let you go, I always like to conclude, and not just to mention thanks, Ed, for sharing some time with us and sharing some wine and piquette with us. Say thanks for everyone for coming for Tasting Room Thursday. Obviously, we're going to be having more pinchos and more wine. Basically, you can drink all this Foreign Affair stuff right until Alex says we're done. No more. So if everyone has a glass in front of them, obviously, if you want to raise a glass, I always want to say thank you to Ed. Cheers to Foreign Affair, and cheers to Ontario wine.
Thank you.
Cheers to Ontario wine. Thank you, guys.